Welcome to the first episode of Game Music Minutia, the series where I will break down the themes, influences, and overall narrative impact of some of video games' best and not so fantastic scores. To start off this exploration into the world of gaming music, I had to begin with one of my favorite franchises, and one that truly checks off all the positive boxes of what makes game music great: Silent Hill. Of course, we have to start with the first game and how the composition even came to be before we can delve deeper into the franchise as a whole. This episode will be part 1 of 2 of the first game, where I'll focus on the influences of the music. Now, let's get spooky. No jump scares here. Promise. Now, to begin, a little background on the composing of the score. The music in the first Silent Hill game was composed by sound director Akira Yamaoka. The amazing thing about his influence on the game is that he created the songs independently from the gameplay, meaning he came up with all the business before even seeing a full realization of what the game would look like. Sure, story ideas and the overall look of the game were explained to Yamaoka, but still, it was impressive to literally create something out of nothing. In an interview with Fact Mag, Yamaoka looked back on the initial release of the game, and citing the landscape of survival horror at the time, he felt that aside from gameplay, the music and the other titles didn't really stand out much. He was sort of right, at least in the mainstream titles. So if you look back at 1999, what was the king of survival horror? Resident Evil. In fact, Konami's hope for Silent Hill was that it would become their own Resident Evil franchise, and by 1999, Capcom had both Resident Evil and Resident Evil 2 released, basically monopolizing the survival horror market for the mainstream players. Of course, we also had games like the Clock Tower series, D&D 2, several Alone in the Dark titles, and Parasite Eve, but those games didn't hold the same amount of oomph that Konami wanted to channel like Resident Evil. Also, just as a side note, the music for Parasite Eve was composed by my girl, Yoko Shimomura, and it's fantastic, but we'll talk about her another day. One main point Yamaoka made about this was that most games relied on a certain pattern and theme in their music, and he decided that he could make the music stand out while also amplifying the horror in the game itself by breaking these conventions. In part 2 of the first game's breakdown, I'll go heavily into the ways that Yamaoka broke the industry standard and used sound effects to great effect for the future of gaming. But until then, let's push on with the influences of this game. Most people know that Yamaoka began his music career in rock. While his root influences of that genre can be heard better in later Silent Hill games, this first game was an experiment for the composer. Sure, you can hear the rock influence in the Silent Hill intro song, but his greatest inspiration for pushing himself came from his favorite film, and one of my personal favorites too, Suspiria. The 1977 Dario Argento directed horror film was composed by the band Goblin, who Yamaoka cites as a band that is his musical twin. Much like the experimental approach Goblin took with Suspiria, Yamaoka wanted to expand into industrial, ambient, noise, classical, and trip-hop for the first game's score. Listening to the Suspiria tracks like Witch and the intro song, the industrial and melodic cacophony is all there. Witch, for example, features one main drum-like beat that sounds like it could be made from floorboards slapping together, as if someone was running away, with a wailing woman's voice over it all. Yamaoka made a similar track with Until Death, which features the same sort of frantic pace. What's amazing is that Yamaoka took this Goblin influence and created his own take on it, but if you play the music from either score over the other's visual media, they fit pretty nicely. The second main influence for Yamaoka was Angelo Badalamenti, and more specifically, his work from Twin Peaks. The tonal and thematic drives for Silent Hill can be traced back to Badalamenti's music on the show, stepping into jazz riffs and almost soap opera-esque melodies. The theme song for Twin Peaks encapsulates this to a T, with that swelling synth score feeling right out of Days of Our Lives, but the rock jazz guitar over it giving it that edgy and mysterious feel. Also, isn't it interesting that the opening cinematic for the show spent a good amount of time on those industrial machines cutting down metal and wood? It sort of reminds me of how the Silent Hill music has that dreamy tone but also industrial noise. Oh wait, it's not a coincidence. Boom! Anyway, Yamaoka's more melodic tracks, like Tears of and Killing Time, have that same soap opera style, even with the added touch of some distortion placed on the melodies to make it almost sound like an old TV show. One last comparison to make here is Badalamenti's track The Bookhouse Boys, which takes a more direct jazz inspiration. This same, more upbeat track can be heard in Yamaoka's Other Side. Both songs still maintain the tone of the stories, but manage to slip in higher tones that manifest a more positive and somewhat jovial feeling. Pretty cool! Okay. Anyway. So those were the major influences for Yamaoka when creating the score. In the next video, part 2 of this first game, we're going to be talking about how the musical score created the overall atmosphere, tone, and the themes that the game has. Basically, what makes the game so dang spooky. Well, we're going to delve into that. But before we go, I wanted to address something Yamaoka said in the interview that resonated with me personally. As a horror fan myself of both games and movies, I think they tend to get a bad rap for the subject matter they deal with. While fans are entitled to their own favorite genres and aesthetics, blood spatter and meaningless violence isn't the only thing that makes horror stand out. It's not what makes every person who says they're a horror fan flock to a new franchise or game. I mean, that's definitely not me. For me, it's all about the tone and atmosphere the media is addressing. With Silent Hill, I find that it truly tackles some dark subject matter in a really cathartic and healing way. A topic I'll get much more into in the later episodes. But I thought it was a very brilliant way Yamaoka described artists who make media for the horror genre. He said, "When I try to make happier music, I become very depressed and sad myself. I don't mean to get philosophical, but when you treat and create music, it's about keeping balance. If you do too many happy songs, you become negative. But when I make darker music, I tend to go to this place that isn't inherent in me, but it adds into my persona when I'm creating music in the moment, and the result is I get lifted out of whatever darkness I'm in." End quote. So, making even these videos for all of you is actually more about addressing my own personal need to create, and not so much about having fun or really getting views. I mean, those aspects are nice and welcome, don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, creating the things that interest me are what keep me moving forward and what keep me healthy. Seriously, I implore anyone out there that has the same even tiny desire to create to do so, because it will help in so many emotional and psychological ways, really. Alright, thanks for letting me preach for a minute. Any likes, subscriptions, or sharing of this video would mean the world to me. And like I said, I'll talk to you next week with part 2 of this video, where we break down the tones and overall themes that the music brings to the game. I'm looking forward to it, so hopefully you are too. Thanks for watching.